These are just cooked fish. We want young men who want to eat the British alive. And if you cannot eat with us, how do you manage to fight with us? And it is at that moment that these people think that he is such a big threat to the country, and so let's murder him.
And who are these people, pulling it out of context anyway, spend one night in solitary confinement.
Not one Congress member ever went to Kala Paani. It was only the armed revolutionaries. What is quit India? Do or die means what? Nobody really knew. It was probably the first book in the history of world literature which was banned even before it was published. And the conditions were so pathetic, so inhuman. Several of them committed suicide or some became insane. And what an ungrateful nation you would be that we are able to breathe in free air thanks to the sacrifices of some of these people. And we don't even know their names.
Yeah, my main takeaway from this conversation, Vikram, is that history is very complex.
You can love someone, you can hate someone, but let your love or hatred be informed, not on rhetoric, not on assumptions, not by your stereotypes of what that person is.
Vikram, welcome back. Looking forward to this conversation as well. And looks like your book size is getting bigger and bigger. I showed the Tipu Sultan's book, but these two together,
you will not be able to.
How many pages? This is, but for people to get some sense of. And I will not lie and say I read all of it, but I did read most of it.
Yeah.
And I think we all hear the name Savarkar. It comes up in a lot of conversations, especially last 20 years. I don't remember growing up we would hear Savarkar that much or not, but I think his stock has risen, I think, Indian political landscape for last 20, 30 years. But, pretty similar to, I think, what we were talking last book, while Savarkar is the focus of this book, but pretty much the history of the entire period, especially from, around 1900 to till independence, really comes alive because he was in some ways big part of, what was going on, and he was trying to shape in his own way. So again, maybe I'll start again this, similar question of, interest in Savarkar, how do you decide that, Savarkar deserves, I guess I should not say, I'm sure, someone of his influence definitely deserves many biographies, but your particular interest that, you choosing to commit many years of life on studying his life.
Thank you, Mukesh. Good to be back after the last episode. It was a long conversation on Tipu, and now a totally different person, but both, I think, very polarizing characters. Opinions are sharply divided for and against. So even I never read about Savarkar while growing up. I think in the CBSE textbooks of our times, I don't think there was
एक लाइन आता था Veer Savarkar.
वो भी मुझे याद नहीं है, मैंने कुछ कभी पढ़ा हो.
आप बाहर बैठे थे ना इसलिए.
अभी शायद
मेरे नंबर अच्छे आते थे.
But I come from a half Maharashtrian family, and in my maternal house there were some murmurs about him. There were some references to him, but I really didn't know who he was. Some man of consequence is all that was known. And I kept reading about him because he wrote a lot. He wrote copiously. He wrote in Marathi too, which thankfully I can understand. So it was easy to read those. And again, like in the case of Tipu Sultan, I thought it's a historian's burden. If a young man or woman today in India wants to know what is all this noise about, why is he featuring so much, in contemporary discourse, there is no real material they could fall back on till the time my book came in. In 2019 was when this first volume came out. Till the last biography of Savarkar before that was written by this man called Dhananjay Keer, which was in the 1960s when Savarkar was still alive. And that's a hagiographical account, Mahima Mandan karte hue uska. So that book, after that there's nothing. And so many other characters, whether it is Gandhi, Nehru, Bhagat Singh, people have been revisiting them, Sardar Patel, Subhash Chandra Bose, all the icons of the freedom movement. People keep revisiting, reassessing their roles, their contributions. But somehow Savarkar remained a persona non grata for both sides, the right wing too. They didn't really invest much in reading about what the man said, what he stood for, and why is his philosophy, his thought process so relevant today and also contentious today. So I think that's with that in mind is when all these so many years of hearing his name, I got propelled into doing something serious about him. And I was fortunate to get a senior fellowship at the Nehru Memorial Museum and Library in Delhi. And those 5 to 6 years I dedicated to completely immersing myself in his life and times, and as you rightly said, the biography is like I think a window to the history of the times.
right.
Through the life of that person, you paint an entire portrait of what all happened, how your protagonist influences the social and cultural climate of the time, and vice versa. How the social and political climate influences your protagonist. I think that dialectic, when it happens, a biography becomes more enriching, according to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for all the people listening, I will, highly recommend, people who are interested in knowing what was going on in India during those, 50 very important years.
Yeah.
And also why, I guess, Savarkar is a in some ways polarizing figure, and there's so much one can learn about history. So I think it will take a while to get through both volumes, but it's worth the read. I think have to really understand what is going on in history. So I'll heavily recommend. Whenever I read a biography, one thing I almost always notice is childhood years. They shape so much of what were to happen, and even I'm sure you probably reflect on your childhood. I do same, and feel like almost the wheels were set in motion in your teenage year with the early influence, what the thoughts were. In retrospect, a lot of it just plays out, and it's like seems to be true in Savarkar case also. He was a bit of a firebrand growing up. Also has his own opinions. Was reading, composing poems, and and polarizing. Some teachers didn't like what he was doing, and so on. And that's a quite, significant thing about it, how much who are going to be start to become clear in early years.
Very true. I think as that Hindi muhara, honhar birwan ke ho cheekne paat. I think that's true.
पूत के पाँव पालने में डूब जाते हैं.
True. So even with him, he was born in Bhagur in Nashik district, a small little village, to a very zamindari landlorded family. But a great influence on him was his father, Damodar Pant Savarkar, who instilled the whole rigor of reading not only Indian works on history, on philosophy, on society and all that, but also Western literature. And so right from a very young age, I think...
And was his father was an exception, or I think he's from this Chit Pawan Brahmin community. वहाँ पे उन community में ऐसा culture था?
हाँ, पढ़ना लिखना for that community, which was also wealthy, landed. तो शायद normally में आ जाता था ये बात. And all the entire family, his elder brother Baba Rao or Ganesh Damodar, younger brother Narayan Rao, they all post dinner, they would have these discussions among themselves about books they read and so on. And as you said, very early, I think when he was 7 or 8, he started composing poetry in Marathi. Some of his teachers admonished him, saying just tukbazi karne se kavita nahi banta and all that. But this little boy, even at the age of 12, I think he wins his first poetry contest in some submission to a newspaper. So, and the tragedies of his early childhood, he loses his mother when he's just 8 or 9 years old to cholera. And उसके तुरंत बाद महाराष्ट्र में उस जमाने में प्लेग की महामारी बहुत फैल रही थी. So in the plague, his father also passes away. And then by the time they are 10 or 11, Savarkar is orphaned. He has an elder brother, younger sister. They all migrate to Nashik. So I think those formative years did a great role in influencing his mind and thoughts, but also the Maharashtra of that time, which was so, I think, foment with the revolutionary zeal. So 1857, which happened, that also had a lot of protagonists who were Maharashtra. I mean, Rani Lakshmi Bai, Tantya Tope, Peshwa Nana Sahib. And that ember of revolution, I think it never subsided there. And the British also write about it. Say, हम कुछ भी कर लें, इनको कभी भी स्वीकृति वो नहीं देंगे हमारे शासन के लिए. We can give them education, we can give them anything. But the Chitpavans who feel that, we have taken the country from them and not the Mughals, which is the true thing, that it was from the Marathas that the British took India. So there's always that rebellion. So you had early, revolutions led by people like Vasudev Balwant Phadke, who's called the father of Indian revolutions, was also in Maharashtra. And Savarkar's childhood time, they were these Chapekar brothers. And Bal Gangadhar Tilak, who was, of course, a firebrand leader himself. And the Chapekars, so when the plague epidemic raged Maharashtra, a lot of oppressive laws were put by the British. In fact, the Epidemic Act, which was in place for all of us during the COVID times, was actually promulgated at that time in 1896, Epidemics and Control Act and so on. So unlike now where people wanted to find a cure, at that time the British government was very oppressive. Anybody who got plague, they were ostracized, their homes would be raided, women molested, all these kind of things that came to light. And so aggrieved were the Maharashtrians by that. And these three brothers, the Chafekar brothers, they go and kill the plague commissioner of Pune. And that creates a sensation all over Maharashtra. And Savarkar then is probably a boy of 12 or 13 years. And he makes a vow in front of the goddess, family goddess, Ashtabhuja Bhavani, saying, I will Shatrus Marta Mare to Zunzain, Marathi, which meant till my last breath, I will keep fighting and killing the enemy. And that early influence, I think, led him to also start what is probably India's first organized secret society, modeled again on the lines of what the Italian revolutionaries like Mazzini and Garibaldi and all these people were doing. So something which he started, influenced by that.
God. And during these formative years, he was, I think you mentioned Bal Gangadhar Tilak's newspaper, I forget the name. Kesari, right? He was reading it, editorials, and then debating and organizing small groups of boys of his age to come listen, read it out aloud, and debate what's going on. And that was forming, in some ways, shaping his political ideology from that early age.
Yeah.
And I think
there was another newspaper called Card, which was by Shivram Paranjpe. So both these newspapers, Card was more radical, more extreme in its views. So I think he was influenced by both these. And I think those early seeds of reading a lot of books, which the father had instilled in him. He was reading about revolutions abroad. And then this small group of boys, they formed first something called the Rashtra Bhakta Samuh. Again, influenced by this whole Tilak idea of bringing community together in the Ganesh Utsav, public celebration of the Ganesh Chaturthi. In that, it was a breeding ground where you could find young people who you thought were, very nationalistic and brave. You form a samuh of that. And that slowly became what was called the Mitra Mela. So that was a group of young people, and they, in secret, they assembled in one of those houses on the first floor. It is still there in Nashik, this place. And there, if you see on the walls, you had the photographs of all the leaders of the 1857 revolution, right from Bahadur Shah Zafar to Lakshmi Bai and the Chafekar brothers. And they were literally positing themselves as the inheritors of this revolutionary movement. And and later that organization it got renamed as Abhinav Bharat, Young India, which again, Mazzini had something called Young Italy in Italy. So on similar lines, secret society, there's a rites of passage to become a member, and you take an oath or a vow that you will,
and some code language and all that, right? Yeah,
correct.
This is all in his teenage years.
Yes.
And then from there, actually, before as part of your research in the book, did you go through some of those editorials? What was being written in Kesari or Card?
Yes.
Just give us some sense of kya likhte the so ko log ko. This was, I'm guessing, 1890s,
1900s. I think by then the nationalistic fervor had already started. Congress also had been formed by then. So people were talking especially about, there was awareness of economic loot of the country. So that was being spoken about. Social issues, a lot of social reform, which contemporaries of that time, you had Mahatma Phule and others who were there in Maharashtra. You had Justice Ranade, a very great scholar who was also talking about social reforms and the fact that we were a slave country. That consciousness and how to get out of that, rigmarole, that was also being discussed.
Yeah. So he was reading all this, and at some point, I guess he started pursuing career in law, and then decides to, I guess the only way to pursue career in law in those days was to go to England.
No, before that he was in the Ferguson College in Pune, where he does a graduate degree. And there too, Pune then becomes the highway, where from Nashik to a big metro city. And that was where Tilak was and Paranjpe was. And so the activities of Abhinav Bharat became more, focused there. And they organized the first ever student bonfire protesting against the partition of Bengal. Bengal, the echoes of that were seen in Maharashtra, which was protesting against it. And when he was a student, he organizes this. Even now in Pune, there is a place where Lakdi Pul area, where this bonfire was organized by Savarkar. And for that, he paid a very heavy price. He was rusticated from college. He had to pay a fine and all of that. Now, but Tilak noticed this zeal in him, and he writes a recommendation letter to this man called Shyamji Krishna Varma. Now, very fascinating. I think he was like a colossus.
This was the guy who was running his India House in
London.
Right.
So he was a very learned man. He had done his degree from Oxford, served as a diwan in some princely estates in Gujarat, got frustrated, and then goes away to London. And then the scene of Indian revolution shifts to Europe. And people may wonder, why is that? Because here the sedition laws were so strong. Strict in India, like I think they're even now. But those days it was stricter. But in Europe, you could openly, talk against the government. You could write articles, papers.
So you can just, let me get this straight. Like you can be in England, in London in those days, and write against this imperial rule and all of that. But you can do the same thing in India.
Yes, as long as you just wrote, it's okay. If you took the gun and did something, then it was a crime there too. But the laws were so even the Irish revolutionaries, all of them, and Lenin also was he had taken shelter in places which were in London, in Paris, and other parts of Europe. So that's why Shyamji moves there, and there's a fascinating array of characters. There's this lady, Parsi woman called Madam Bhikaji Kama from Bombay. So she leaves her married life and she moves away to work for the country. She's initially working with Dadabhai Nauroji, and then she gets disillusioned with the pacifist kind of thing, and then moves to the revolutionary side. And she and Shyamji and others, Shyamji sets up this India House, which is like a hostel for all young students, and he's giving scholarships to young nationalistic students who can come there ostensibly to study, but to infiltrate and to carry on the secret movement. And so Savarkar is recommended by Tilak to Shyamji, and so on a scholarship he goes to London to study law at the Gray's Inn. And those 5 years are like the stormy years in London, where literally he's the leader of the India House. And that era too, in the chapters I've described, it's almost like a Sherlock Holmes kind of, Alfred Hitchcock kind of mystery.
He almost like takes over India House, right? I think it's during those years he also writes this history of Indian Revolution.
Yes, that's right.
Which has become a pretty influential work at that time, which is surprising because he was still in his 20s, I think, around that time.
Correct. So he goes to the British Library where I sat to do the research for these books. And uses the British records to write a narrative of history which can be used against them. So where till then 1857 was shown as this Sepoy mutiny. Few Sepoys here and there, they revolted and we crushed the rebellion. But Savarkar calls it the first war of Indian independence, and that's what the book is all about. And that book too, it almost became like the Bible for all revolutionaries even much later. Whether it was Bhagat Singh, who used to use that as a criteria to recruit people into his HSRA, and later this Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose and Rash Bihari Bose for INA recruits. Translations of that book were in several languages, which was done. So it laid bare what were the causes of a revolution, how do you inflict a revolution, and so on, which is what he does there.
Did you read that book also?
Yes.
Yeah. Anything from the book that stayed with you?
Well, the poet in Savarkar comes through everywhere. As a historian, I don't rank him too high because historian is supposed to be a little objective and cold in his or her portrayal of facts. But here there's a poetic flourish. It had a different purpose, I think, where history is marshaled also to create that sense of nationalism and unity and to fight for the country and to lay your own life down. So the way it's been written is wonderful, but his opening lines also that, for a revolution that goes from Peshawar to Calcutta, it cannot be on the basis of just, beef and pork lard, those cartridges. But there was a deeper quest. And he says there were two driving reasons for this revolution. One is the quest for Swarajya or self-rule, but also Swadharma, your own faith, which brought both the Hindus and the Muslims together. And he actually, the Savarkar of that time, is also a great votary of Hindu-Muslim unity. He says in the rainbow called India, every faith, person following every faith is a different color, and together we form the rainbow called India. Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, Sikhs, Jains, everyone.
Yeah.
So you see a different kind of person.
But his work was starting to get noticed by the British even that time. I think there was infiltration. They were watching his correspondence, and he was already he was still studying law, but started to be seen as this guy who's going to can cause trouble in England as well as probably back home.
Yeah, the entire India House was under surveillance. In fact, there are graphic accounts of how Scotland Yards, the detectives were always around this house, saying something is going on inside which is fishy, because they were also making bombs, learning to make bombs, because that also is a story in itself where Savarkar deputes this man called Senapati Bapat, Pandurang Mahadev Bapat, who's titled as Senapati Bapat. We have a Senapati Bapat road also in Pune.
Right.
But I don't know how many people know who the person was. So he goes to collect this bomb manual, which was found with some Russian tailor. And then they get that. And Senapati Bapat has a German girlfriend who's doing her MBBS or something in Berlin. So they go to her and she translates it from Russian to Hindi and English and so on. And then they make copies of that, and those things come back to India. Now, even Savarkar's manuscript on 1857, as you rightly said, the British banned. It was probably the first book in the history of world literature which was banned even before it was published. So, because they knew the contents were very provocative, and so they disallowed it from coming. The Sea Customs Act was put on it so that it could not come to India. But there too, these whether it was bomb manual or this book or even actual bombs and pistols, they would be sent in this false bottom boxes.
But they're making it inside the India House?
Yes, they were making the bombs. So picric acid and all these things, like a laboratory where they were using that bomb manual to manufacture it, and also smuggling arms to India. Because if you remember, the British had banned Indians from arming themselves. So in self-defense or to carry a revolution, you didn't have guns and pistols. So these people put this in false bottom boxes. So on the top there would be some, gifts and presents and all that. But under that you would have these very provocative stuff and weapons. They would cross customs of various countries.
There were no X-ray scanners.
No X-ray scanners. And even this book on 1857, it goes first from London to his brother, Baba Rao. They go to Sholapur to a press. Police को पता चल जाता है, छापे पड़ते हैं. So they take the manuscript back. Then it is sent back to Europe. Then it goes to France. The French police, they get behind it. Then they take it back from there. Then it is sent to Germany. And there they thought, Germans had a lot of Indology experience. So they'll do, this was in Marathi, so the Devanagari script. But they made a mess of the typesetting. So it was withdrawn from there. Then it goes to Belgium. That is where the final thing was printed. And VVS Iyer, one of his accomplices, he translates it into English. And these bomb manuals and the book on 1857 come to India with this kind of, imagine the amount of effort it took to publish that one book. And a book which has the rare privilege of being banned before it was even published. And these bomb manuals were found with Tilak, also with the Bengal revolutionaries, because Maharashtra and Bengal were the earliest, hotbeds of revolution. And Bengal, just as there was Abhinav Bharat here, there was the Anushilan Samiti there. People like Aurobindo Ghosh, Barin Ghosh, Prafulla Chaki, Khudiram Bose. All these people were using this in that Alipur bomb case. And similarly, in Maharashtra, in Nasik, there was Anant Lakshman Kanhere, who uses the gun to kill the local, commissioner, Jackson. So this huge intercontinental revolution which these people were spearheading, quite a fascinating tale.
So he gets involved in all this stuff pretty early and almost takes a leadership intellectual leadership role at
Yes.
least at India House,
Yeah.
which British are watching closely. And there's a story of, I think, at some point in India House, he also meets Gandhi,
Yeah.
which is pretty fascinating because they're in some ways eventually they become this
Rivalry.
ideological rivalry, which lasts more than half a century.
Yeah.
But in their, Gandhi is a little older at that time,
Yeah.
and they had this this whole exchange about, Gandhi was vegetarian. I think they had some exchange around that, right?
Yeah. So Gandhi, the first one, it's mentioned in one of the Harindranath Srivastav's account of those stormy years in London, where this Gandhi comes to India House. I mean, he's come to London and he spends a night or so at India House. And there he's quite shocked to see Savarkar, who's like a Chitpavan Brahmin, who's cooking prawns in the kitchen. And Savarkar offers this to him. And he says, no, I'm a vegetarian. So this man retorts saying, these are just cooked fish. We want young men who want to eat the British alive. And if you cannot eat with us, how do you manage to fight with us? So obviously it was not a nice way to start off a friendship, if at all there was a friendship. The second time is when, during Dashera and all these festivals, there would be gatherings at the India House and many people would come and give lectures.
Yeah.
So Gandhi gives a lecture there and he says, I will talk about Ram Rajya, the virtues of, an ideal, this thing. I don't believe in violence at all. And a few speakers later, Savarkar takes on the podium and he rebuts Gandhi. And he says, even Ram Rajya, to establish that, Lord Ram had to fight a war. He didn't sit in a satyagraha in front of Ravan and to get Sita off. So violent, uprising is necessary to achieve your objective. And his claim was absolute non-violence is not in the Indic spirit. All our gods and goddesses are shown with astra and shastra, with the idea that if there is adharma, you have to annihilate it. Krishna orders Arjun to do the same in the Bhagavad Gita. So we've never abstained from violence if it is for a righteous cause. So the call is then, is the British Empire an adharmic entity? If it is, then the means don't matter, the end matters. And I think that is where the two fundamentally disagreed. One was looking at a violent, uprising to uproot the British
and this was an interaction in their formative years.
Gandhi was already...
He was somewhat established. I think he was doing his work in South Africa.
South Africa,
days, right?
Yeah, he was probably 40 or so.
Were they in touch later on or not really? It was only in the public, where they have things to say.
I think it's only once after that when Savarkar is under house arrest in Ratnagiri that they meet.
Okay.
Because by then differences of opinion have also come between the two on matters of, religious conversion, Hindu-Muslim unity, untouchability, eradication and all of that. And so Gandhi calls on him in his house in Ratnagiri and the two are supposed to have had a long discussion where he says, I disagree with everything that you say. And so, they were, I think, and it's quite strange, Mukesh, that even in the Indian parliament, their photos are diagonally opposite to each other. I don't credit our politicians with so much of wisdom to have thought that.
Logged in debate forever.
So I think it's very, it's a kind of ironic.
And so around this time, I think while he was gaining prominence inside India House, there's this that I think the murder happens in UK, in London, and somewhere
Madan Lal Dhingra.
So he was the person directly involved.
Yes,
but people suspect this guy also had a role to play, and I guess he was tried and eventually sentenced for that.
So the India House unravels after Madan Lal Dhingra murders this man called Curzon Wiley in London. So imagine the shockwaves it would have sent right under the King Emperor's nose. In London, Indian student killing a British senior officer who was in charge of keeping spies on the Indian students.
So about 1908.
1908, And that leads to the whole unraveling of the India House. It is disbanded. And for a brief while, Savarkar goes away to Paris, where Shamji and Bilkaji Kama and others have gone. But he comes back to London, ill-advised, doesn't take anyone's advice on it. And the minute he lands at that Victoria station in London, he is arrested. And then the trial is a hoax. I mean, it's farcical. They have already decided the outcome. And he is given probably one of the largest sentences of his times, where 2 transportations for life, where, life imprisonment, which is one transportation was 25 years. So 25 plus 25, 50 long years, starting 1910. So if he had lived on, he was probably 27 76 or something at that time. So another 50 years, 76 till the time you were that, you would be in jail. And in what kind of jail? It was in the Kala Paani, the dreaded Kala Paani, Port Blair, in the Andamans.
And the exact charges were what?
Sedition against the British crown, and that is why the British didn't want to try him in India, in UK, because there he would have still got away. Because there's no conclusive evidence that he was the kingpin. So that is why they extradite him and bring him all the way to India.
And on the way, this incident happens where he tries to run away.
Where I think even recently, the Prime Minister was there with President Macron. And they opened an Indian consulate at Masai.
Okay.
So, and I think the Prime Minister also tweeted that this was a place where, so when the ship on the way, which was coming from England to India, it stops for a while at this French port of Masai. And during that time, he tries to, and he's constantly guarded there by the British soldiers. So he goes to the toilet and tries to open the porthole, and he jumps out of it and swims a little distance and comes onto the French shore. Now there he asks a French sergeant, take me to the magistrate and so on. But by then the people on the ship have already come. They capture him and go away. Now this becomes a legal issue. Now this guy is training to be a lawyer, so he knows the law. He says, the minute I have landed on French soil, British have no jurisdiction on me. So now it is up to the French government to either capture me and hand me back or to give me asylum. So this entire thing becomes a prolonged case in the International Court of Justice in Hague.
So he was kept in France?
No, he was already, nobody cared. They said, we'll bring him back to India. So the British arm twist the French. In fact, the French government falls on some of these, episodes that happen because there's a lot of backlash in France saying we should support revolutionaries. We should, we are a country born out of revolution.
Created revolution.
But the British somehow managed to win the case at Hague. And then by then they've already brought him to India. The trial, he doesn't even have a jury. So he argues his own case. And
this was in Pune?
Yes, back in India. And so he's sentenced off in 1910. And by then his elder brother, Baba Rao, it's already been 2 years. He's already been sent to Kala Paani because he was the India coordinator of the Abhinav Bharat. And all these bomb manuals and pistols, he was handling from what Savarkar was doing in UK.
Got it. So he's sentenced for 50 years of imprisonment in Andamans, which was known as Kala Paani. Do you know the story on Kala Paani kyun bolte the?
I think it was so dreaded.
I guess. Fair enough.
Yeah. No, the tortures there. I mean, I've actually gone through not only Savarkar's memoirs of what they endured there, but also several others of contemporaries, and only the revolutionary prisoners, young men who were probably in their late teens, early 20s, close to 100 of them kept there at that time, 1910, and the conditions were so pathetic, so inhuman that even good food to eat was not basic human facilities. The basi khana milta tha, in that there would be kide makode, in the food, eating which you would have diarrhea.
Nearly solitary confinement, dark, dingy
cells, and there were fixed times to go to the washroom. And if you had diarrhea and if you needed to visit often, you could not. And so most of them defecated and urinated in their own cells, in their little cells, tiny cells where you can't even stand up.
Hard to comprehend.
And standing handcuff punishment for several months. And there also you are standing, sitting, sleeping, eating amidst your own squalor, your own defecation and everything. And in the blazing heat of Port Blair, you're made to do that Koloka bell punishment, where instead of the bell, the freedom fighter is yoked, and every day you have to drain out 30 pounds of oil. And 1 ounce also, if it is less, you'll be whiplashed, you will not be given food. So the kind of conditions were so bad. Many people, young people, they were all, as I said, youngsters who were in their early 20s.
Probably not expected to live there for very long, right?
Yeah, most of them, several of them committed suicide, or some became insane. In fact, the British start an entire asylum, in Port Blair on the Haddo Island, which is to treat people who just lost their mind because of tortures, electric shocks, and it was just a hellhole. And today, Britain, talking about human rights and all that, this is something which is less known secret, about how they treated our, freedom fighters. And today also, if people go to Kalapani and that cellular jail, there's a sound and light show, which is not too great, but just walking through those ramparts, you're filled with such an overwhelming sense of desolation there. But the sad part, Mukesh, if we ask someone, can we name 5 prisoners, forget Savarkar, 5 others who were jailed in Kalapani, none of us in India, we'd probably be able to take their names.
Okay, let's name 5. Aapko yaad hai?
Of course, Barin Ghosh, Sachindranath Sanyal, there was Indu Bhushan Roy, right. So Ulaskar Dutt. There's several of
these
them.
All the stories are lost to history, but I mean, these people literally, sacrifice their whole life for the cause they believed in, and we're all beneficiary of that, much down the line.
And what an ungrateful nation you would be that we are able to breathe in free air thanks to the sacrifices of some of these people, and we don't even know their names. On the walls there are, there's a plaque which records all the names. Majority from Bengal, some from Maharashtra. Later, during the Gadar movement, you had lots of the people from Punjab, the United Provinces or UP, some from South India. So it was like a microcosm of India. And these are the people whom I think it should become a Tirthasthan for all Indian, young Indian
this
students.
was exclusively for basically sending the freedom fighter type of people, not other type of revolutionaries.
Not one Congress member ever went to Kalapani. It was only the armed revolutionaries. And they were bundled in along with the hardcore criminals who were accused of, rape and theft and murder and all of that. So these were treated on par with those, real dacoits and robbers and all that.
Savarkar, his brother, both were there at the same time.
Yeah.
They were able to see each other.
I think that also is a story in itself where almost for 1 year or something, Savarkar never knows that his brother is also there. And one night when he is going to deposit the oil, that is when he sees the brother also depositing his share of oil and coming back, and they're not allowed to talk. And so it's a very, emotional moment where they make eye contact and say, you also come here, and what happens to our family. And at that time, the condition of the wives, both of them are married, and the younger brother, the entire family is actually ostracized by society as being kin of conspirators and all of that. And that time they literally, and the British take away their entire property. Everything is confiscated. Savarkar's degrees are taken away from him, and his family back home is left to literally beggary to eke a living. And Bhikaji Kama sends money from Paris for the Savarkar family to, earn their livelihood. And it is that kind of condition where even utensils to cook were taken away by the British. Forget anything else. So you can imagine the grit of even these ladies who, kind of put up such a brave thing, even as the men struggle, like what I mentioned in the Kalapani.
Yeah, all these stories are not known. I mean, amount of length, not only the people who were, involved in the freedom fighting, but, the sacrifice, their family, and probably the cost of sacrifice might last many generations, because also, imagine growing up in that household. Yeah. So he spends about 15, 16 years there.
No, about 11 years.
11 years.
11 years in Kalapani, then 3 years in the Indian mainland jails, 14 years. Yeah. And then 13 years of house arrest.
But there's also, there's obviously a lot of debate and controversy about the circumstances in which, he was able to at least get lesser than, the original 50 years of imprisonment. And as you were, studying this, what's your understanding of, what were the situations and the conditions of some leniency to be able to, resume some kind of normalcy?
Correct. So this, the tortures and others which were inflicted, which I mentioned, that was in the early couple of 4-5 years. Then that was a time when Emperor George V came to India, and you had the capital being shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. You had the Delhi Darbar. So during all these occasions, and before the First World War, after the First World War, there would be leniency given, clemency, where even now, right? I mean, if there's some major event, some people are pardoned. Sure. So like that, even then, these hardcore criminals, the emperor would pardon some of them. And for that, you had to write a petition. You had to write, I'm so and so, I'm living in this condition and I need to be pardoned. So in that context, we have these 5 or 6 petitions, which I've included as they are in the appendix to the book. And that is usually held out against Savarkar as if he was pleading for mercy. These were mercy petitions. It was a yachika petition which they had to sign. All of them. Barin Ghosh signs one, Sachindranath Sanyal signs one. Later, you have Ram Prasad Bismil, Ashfaqullah Khan, all of them signing a petition. So I think it was a normal route for political prisoners. It was an agency made available to them. And to say that he actually, the language of that petition is very servile, and which is how it has to be. And there was a style to the language. We beg to remain your most humble servant. Just as today you put with warmest regards. I may not have any regard for you, but still in my email I have to say with sincerely yours, humbly yours. There's a way of salutation. You can't. I mean, Gandhi's letters have that. I remain your most obedient servant. So you can't take that on literal sense and say, oh, he said I'm your obedient servant. So Savarkar's petitions are like that. But some of the pointers which show that, when Reginald Craddock, one of the Home Department's members from Delhi, come to Port Blair to interview all these political prisoners. And he writes that I had a long discussion with Savarkar, and he shows no remorse for what he has done. And he's quite proud of whatever he's achieved in London. So that was an opportune moment where a British government member is there, wo dandavat pranam karke mujhe chhod do, main maafi mangta hu. He could have said that. But he himself says he doesn't show any remorse. And these people are dangerous characters, and the revolutionaries are trying their best to attack the cellular jail and free all of them to take them back home. So it seems, and Sachindranath Sanyal in his autobiography, it's in Hindi called Mera Bandi Jeevan, in which he writes, I was advised by Savarkar to write a petition. मैंने हूबहू उन्होंने जैसे लिखा मैंने भी वही लिखा, लेकिन मुझे रिहाई मिल गई, पर उन दोनों को, the Savarkar brothers, उनको रिहाई नहीं मिली, because the British thought that they were very dangerous criminals, and if they come back to Bombay presidency, the revolution which has been snuffed out there, it will get reignited. So there were so many such instances, and I think in 1917 there is a petition which he writes, where it becomes clear that he was acting as a spokesperson for the other political prisoners. And as I said, they were all young people in their 20s. Many of them didn't know English, let alone the English law. So they would look upon this guy who was a lawyer, saying Bada Babu. His name was Bada Babu. And so he wrote in that petition saying, if my name constitutes an obstacle in the release of all the other prisoners, then you can omit my name and release the others. And that will give me as much pleasure as my own release will do. So it was very clear that, he was probably acting for the others too. So this petition which has made such a big hawa out of. And in 1919, when, you had the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms that had kicked in, Savarkar's younger brother Narayan Rao goes to Gandhi, who's by then come and become this huge figure in Indian politics, saying, can you help my brothers? They've been rotting for almost a decade now. So he advises Narayan Rao that tell your brothers to write a petition saying all this, and that you will leave this thing and join us, in constitutional reform and peaceful means and so on. And I will also write a letter to the government seeking their pardon. So Gandhi also writes a letter, and on his advice, these people filed their 5th or 6th petition. So if that was a norm where even Gandhi, advises them to do that, we can't pull it out of context and, make this.
And who are these people, pulling it out of context anyway, spend one night in solitary confinement, before.
And Savarkar's cell was directly in front of the gallows. So every day, you don't have human contact. All that you're seeing is someone howling and screaming to their death and being hung there. And they were not given pen and paper to write. In a cell where you're sitting amidst your own.
So you can't write, you can't read.
You can't read. And so this man with the chalk and sometimes his nails, he was a prolific poet. So on the walls of his cell, he used to write Marathi poetry. Almost some 6,000 lines of this poems called Kamla and Saptarshi. And to spite him, the British jailer called Barry, he would come and whitewash all of it. But this man had committed all of that to memory. And so after he came out of jail, he actually gets those books published. So these are still available, with us as milestones in Marathi literature.
Right. So after his petition was approved, he was, I think, so he was put in house arrest in Ratnagiri, and he was basically couldn't travel anywhere.
Two conditions, that you should not participate in politics, and this was conditional for 5 years, and you are restricted to the district of Ratnagiri in Maharashtra. Even if there's a plague or something, you have to take permission and go.
God.
And this would come up for a review. So almost 3 or 4 times, 5 years, then they extend it to another 2 years, 2 years, 2 years. Every time when they review and I put those documents, the British, to those who say that he had become a collaborator, why would you put a collaborator under house arrest? He was an intelligent man who was trained in law. You would co-opt him and make him a part of your government. 5 years becomes actually 13 years. So it gets extended every time. And the British records clearly say, we have reviewed and we cannot consider him to be trustworthy. He's having underground links even now. And which was a fact. They were surreptitiously still negotiating and in correspondence with several revolutionaries. Chandrasekhar Azad, Bhagat Singh. In fact, Baba Rao, his elder brother, he goes to Varanasi, and just a day before Chandrasekhar Azad is killed, he shoots himself at Alfred Park in Allahabad. The two of them have a meeting, and there's some secret thing that goes on. They were constantly with all these people. Shivram, Rajguru, they were also in a touch with these people. So I think the British surveillance kept all this in mind, and that's why they never gave him a complete freedom. And every time it was being extended. So what was 5 years later becomes 13 years.
Got it. But during these years, so he started reading, voraciously, and started developing his idea of, I guess the word Hindutva is probably in circulation.
Yeah.
But he creates his own version of, again, forgetting the name of I think he writes a book.
Yeah.
What is
this? It's called Essentials of Hindutva. Who is a Hindu?
Right. So what's the backstory behind this, and how did this idea start developing? When did he start thinking about it and writing about it? And was this also again a pretty influential text?
Yes, indeed. I mean, it's in vogue even now in political ascendancy in India. And everyone either takes for or against positions.
I meant maybe in those days, when he wrote this, was it like well received, or it only grew prominence slowly over a period of time?
I think it took time, but this was also 1925 was when finally the RSS also was established. It's in its 100th year now. And based on its version of what Hindutva was. I think the word itself, the Hindutva, the word was coined in Bengal by this man called Chandranath Boshu in 1890 something. So he uses this while he is in jail in mainland India. And the context, like we spoke earlier, I think during the 1857 book, here is a man who's talking about Hindu-Muslim unity. But something changed in the interim. And one was, of course, his personal experience in the jail, where he saw that there were Muslim Pathan, warders who were particularly oppressive. And if you converted, then your punishment would come down. And the thing is, when you're facing that kind of torture, no food and no toilet facilities, whether you say Ram or Allah, it doesn't matter. They just convert to get better situation. And there was no way for them to reconvert because Hinduism did not accept. There was no Shuddhi. So the Shuddhi movement, which the Arya Samaj starts, is to bring these people back to the Hindu fold. Because Hindus did not believe either in converting or reconverting. So that is where he writes. And around this time, you had Gandhi launching the Khilafat movement. Now the wordplay is such that Khilafat sounds ki Angrezon ke khilaf chhedi hui ek muhim. But this was actually to establish a Islamic caliphate in Turkey, where the British had won Turkey in the First World War. And Gandhi was actually doing a barter system with the Indian Muslims, saying, you participate in the non-cooperation movement I am launching. In return, we will support your wish to have a sultan, the caliph in Turkey. And we will achieve both of this in 1 year. In 1 year, you'll have the sultan sitting there, caliph, and in 1 year, I'll get you Swaraj. Now, it was a foolhardy movement, which was destined to fail, because Britain had won the war, the First World War in Turkey. You, as a slave nation, cannot dictate who will become a king in the country you have won. And the people of Turkey themselves did not want the caliph. Mustafa Kemal Ataturk comes in as the democratic ruler. So on that basis, you are mobilizing Indians on a very, very communal issue of their religious identity. To some extent, or to a large extent, I would say the Khilafat movement laid the seeds of partition, which had already, that separatism had started growing with the formation of the Muslim League in 1906. We had the Lucknow Pact in 1916, where separate electorates and all of the separateness, that I'm a distinctive identity, that had started growing. You give it a further fillip with this Khilafat, saying, for an Indian Muslim too, gaining India's freedom is as important for him or her. So you don't need to be given a lollipop saying, we'll help you if you do this and that. So in return for who sits outside.
Yeah.
And so this Khilafat movement is what I think created a lot of rift in the politics of those times. And Savarkar writes his Hindutva essentials in jail. And it's the first book he writes in English. Till then he was writing largely in Marathi. So this was largely maybe for a pan-India audience, where he clearly says anybody who considers this land from the Himalayas to the ocean, Asindhu, Sindhu Paryanta, who think of this as their Pitrubhumi and Punyabhumi. Pitrubhumi is also falsely translated as fatherland. It's not fatherland, and so the Nazi connection, but it is Pitrus are your ancestors. Consider this either as your land of ancestors or your Punya Bhumi. Again, never with the intention of religion, but a land to which your dedication, your allegiance is. You're not bartering your support for some extraterritorial kind of allegiance. That person is culturally a Hindu. You can follow any religion, faith in your house. So this was how this.
And at this point, I think as we should also mention two interesting things, which I gathered, from going through your book is, one is, while he's developing this Hindutva ideology, he himself was quite an atheist.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened later years, but until his, I think most of the time, he was very openly atheist. And second thing is, he also did not believe in he was almost always for treating all castes as equal and not believing in a lot of, ritualistic stuff, right?
Yeah.
Which is pretty strange to, comprehend, how he's seen today.
True. And including things like cow worship.
Yeah.
Where he says, I don't consider the cow as being worthy of worship. It's a very useful animal. If you have to worship it, you do it in your house, but don't let it interfere with day-to-day, transactions and activities. But he also says that where it is being used to shame the Hindu community, then you need to stand up against it and so on. And this caste thing, the Hindutva movement itself, if it's a movement which is calling for Sangathan or, a getting together, consolidation of the Hindus, by its very nature, it needs to be anti-caste because when you're getting all of them together under one common identity, you can't then say there's a Brahmin, there is a, untouchable, there's so many. So most of the Hindutva proponents, one unification is something that they did, and Savarkar put that to practice in those 13 years in Ratnagiri. So where you could not participate in politics. So you do social reform by the day, and by night you are also helping the revolutionaries. So in those 13 years, the kind of things he does there, including, setting up the first temple called Patit Pavan Mandir in 1931 in Ratnagiri, where people of all castes could go and worship. A major thing at that time, Dr. Ambedkar was doing the whole satyagraha to enter the temple. And then here, in fact, the priest would be someone from the lowest caste in the hierarchy. And even the Brahmin had to go and touch his feet. You had an Asprusya Ganpati or an untouchable Ganpati to borrow from Tilak again, to which again the lowest in the caste order would be the priest. Untouchability in schools was, he campaigned to get that removed.
But these are very controversial ideas. A lot of people didn't like, what he was doing.
And intercaste dining in a time when maybe, I don't know even now how it is. At that time, even among the Brahmins in Maharashtra, you had the Konkanas and the Deshas. They would not sit together and eat. Here was a first interdining cafe in Ratnagiri where people of all castes could sit together and eat. So the whole idea that you had to unify the Hindu Samaj and not have them splintered into segments, because then you are easy prey for whoever wants to predate on you. So these were some of the things that he did, and for which there's a lot of correspondence between him and Dr. Ambedkar, where he says, you're the only one who has understood, that the Varna system has to be dismantled for the unification of Hinduism.
Yeah. And so this is around the time around which he also starts Hindu Mahasabha?
He had, no, Hindu Mahasabha was already in vogue.
Okay.
So when he leaves,
Oh, he joins
he
Hindu
joins it as its president. So in fact, 13 years go on like this in Ratnagiri, and then finally in 1937.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. Before we get to 1937, so RSS was founded around 1925.
25.
Did RSS take any inspiration from some of his writings about what Hindutva is? Like, what is the overlap, or they were just not aware of each other? I mean,
No, they were very much. I mean, it was born in probably, his house, which was, his elder brother, Baba Rao, was very much a part of the
but he couldn't because he was not allowed to participate in political activities, or he had just his own.
He had his own thing. He was never a part of the RSS. In fact, later they had a lot of differences of opinion between both of them. But Baba Rao was one of the founding members, along with Dr. Hedgewar, who founded the RSS. It was more like they thought it's like a Boy Scouts, young youth brigade.
Yeah.
So young people were joining this Sangh at that time. And the Hindu Mahasabha, when it came of prominence, they almost naturally assumed that this was our chelas, ye apna youth wing hai. Like you have the party youth wing. But the RSS by then wanted to carve out its own identity. They did not want to be the, tied to the Hindu Mahasabha. Okay. That is where the rift between the two come. And their idea, including on many things, on Hindutva itself, what it was, it had a lot of differences with what I think Savarkar's writings were way too radical, even for his own times and even now. Some of the issues that he raises are very uncomfortable even today and not too palatable.
Got it. So he started participating in Hindu Mahasabha dialogue, and eventually he becomes the president, I think, as you're saying, in 1937.
37. Yeah, 37 he's released, and that too with the Congress intervention, quite strangely, because by 37 you have the provincial governments which have come after the Government of India Act and the elections. So the Bombay presidency, the chief minister, they put a condition to the British that we will join only if you release this man. So the Congress had assumed that he will join them after. In fact, there are letters which I've reproduced of Nehru and even Subhash Chandra Bose, who was the president of the Congress then, sending invitations to him to join the Congress. But he spurns all that and he takes on the Hindu Mahasabha, because he has a very controversial quote there where he says, I'd rather be in the last row of the patriots than in the first row of the traitors. And Congress has become a traitor because they've taken this Hindu-Muslim appeasement to a very large extent, and the country is going to face the repercussions, which happened 10 years later with Partition. So that's why he becomes the president of the Hindu Mahasabha, which till then was a very amorphous kind of.
But Hindu Mahasabha was also a political party.
It was from 1913-14. Madan Mohan Malviya, all these people who were part.
So in some ways rival to Congress party at that time.
Partly, some members had dual membership. It was almost like the Congress was like an umbrella organization. Hindu Mahasabha one part. It was not a fighting fit party, but Savarkar makes it a election winning kind of party, and they start making rapid strides in those years in political campaign, mobilization, and all of that.
And then there is this thing, and you were mentioning before we started also this period 1937 to 47 where so much was going on. World War was about to start. British basically commits India to that war as well.
Correct.
I think Gandhi felt that by supporting British, actually there was also probably Savarkar also supported, he wanted India to participate in that. Maybe, help unravel to the extent you can. Kya ho raha tha us waqt, kaun kya chahta tha, and what happened?
Very confusing era. But, the World War rumblings had begun in 1939. Of course, it breaks out. But by then, in India, you had the Muslim League slowly, literally the demand for Pakistan became more shrill. And that too was the outcome of the 1937 elections, where Jinnah actually loses significantly even in Muslim-dominated areas. And Nehru was then the president. He literally pushes Jinnah to the wall. They could, if they'd come together and formed something together, then maybe the partition plan would not have accentuated. So slowly that demand for Pakistan has been growing. And then you have, of course, by then you have Subhash Chandra Bose, who's disillusioned with the Congress. He's thrown out. And he leaves the country, goes away to Germany first to meet Hitler. and then later goes to Southeast Asia and Japan, where Rash Bihari Bose has formed the Indian National Army, or INA, and he takes on the lead. And he decides to have a military attack on British India to liberate India. And while all this is happening, you have the British sending the Cripps mission to negotiate with the Indians. Now, there too, Savarkar and the Hindu Mahasabha were the only ones who till 1947 opposed partition, contrary to what is thought of. If you see all the resolutions, they say we are opposed to the vivisection of India, something which the Congress had agreed to. In fact, the Cripps mission, when Nehru and Maulana Azad go to meet him, they come out almost a done deal that India is going to be partitioned and Nehru is going to be the first defense minister and so on. And overnight something happens and that thing is sabotaged. And on the back of it, we have Gandhi launching this movement, which is famously called the Quit India movement. But in the Congress's own records and the British government records, it's actually called August Disturbances. So in August 1942, this movement is launched. Within probably 3 or 4 days of it being launched, all the Congress top leadership, including Gandhi, are holed up. Gandhi is put in Aga Khan Palace in Pune, and everyone is in jail. So the movement did not have any plan of action, any idea. What is Quit India? Do or die means what? Nobody really knew. In fact, many people of the time, including Maulana Azad, who was the president of the Congress, opposes this movement. Dr. Ambedkar says this is the most treacherous thing to do against the country and all patriotic Indians must stay away from it. These are his own, he was in the Viceroy's council at that time. So many people, including, these people, and of course Savarkar and the Mahasabha said, we will oppose the Quit India, because we feel Quit India is actually leading to Split India, which is what it eventually happened. So because if you agree to that, then you're somewhere, agreeing to the partition also. So I think that is, those were the difficult times.
So there were many ideologies, many possible paths to freedom, and also different vision for what the end goal should be.
Correct.
And all of it kind of played out in, this whole jamboree of ideas and, cacophony. And British was also literally fighting for survival, which, I don't know how apparent it was, to people who were acting in India, but they were on the, World War II did not go well for British for at least 3-4 years, right? So they had their own issues to worry about, and where Jinnah had his own plans and keeping his, I think the whole cancer thing also very secretive, because
correct.
He knew he has only few months to live, to before this. So but and around, maybe just talking more about just Savarkar's, what was he doing in those years, 40s? So he did not like the idea of Quit India, how it was done, or the repercussions. How did he participate, or didn't participate in the proceedings from there on?
Yeah, so at least the so-called Quit India movement, a lot of them kept away. And during that time, the Congress was completely absent. They resigned their seats from the assemblies, which they had won in the election. So there was a huge political vacuum created. And the Hindu Mahasabha wanted to go and fill that. So he participates in the government. The Hindu Mahasabha participates in the government. Strangely, some in alliance with the Muslim League, whether it was in Sindh. Then, of course, in Bengal, they form a government with the Krishak Party, Krishak Praja Party, Fazlur Rahman, and Shama Prasad Mukherjee is also part of that government. They were like, if there's a Hindu who's still there in the government, maybe they can protect the Hindu interests. In a place like the Northwest Frontier Province or Sindh, where the majority was not of theirs. So he was participating in these government formations with these, the Muslim League and the British Viceroy. But around 45 or 46, he has 2 very fatal heart attacks. And that slowly makes him recede from the political spectrum. And the Hindu Mahasabha also after that becomes so weakened because there's so much of intra-party rivalries. There's a Shama Prasad Mukherjee faction of the Bengalis, and there's a North India faction, the Marathi faction. And the 1946 elections, which was so important because that gave the mandate for, the plebiscite, so to say, for the Shimla Agreement. There, the Hindu Mahasabha came a cropper. I think they won 2 seats or 3 seats all over India. And that literally meant the death of the Hindu Mahasabha as a party.
And while the party was declining, India gains its independence in 47, and within just few months later, Gandhi is assassinated,
Yeah.
and again Savarkar is again comes into headlines because people think that there is some involvement, directly, indirectly.
Correct. True, that's another case in itself. In fact, I had to peruse about 11,000 papers, pages of the Gandhi trial papers in the National Archives of India.
11,000 pages.
Yeah. It was a lot, volumes and volumes. It was a very fascinating, time where the run-up itself, of course, the murder was heinous, and nobody can ever, condone such a thing. But these people also, this Nathuram Godse and Apte, they were not professional, killers or anything. They were just the bunch of young men who were part of the Hindu Mahasabha, and slowly they formed their own some Hindu Rashtra Dal and all of that. And they were so incensed with what was happening in the aftermath of partition, the Naukhali riots, the refugees who were coming and had no way to, have a better life here. They wanted to take revenge. So they had all kinds of crazy plans, like let's go to Pakistan and bomb the new assembly when everyone is in session. Jinnah and others. Like, how are you going to actually transport all the bombs across the border? And attention for detail not there. Then let's raid the Nizam's, treasury while it's going from one city, the cart carrying all the jewels, because the Nizam wanted to accede to Pakistan. That also failed. Around that time, on 12th of January 1948, the paper reports come that Gandhi has gone on a fast unto death, literally twisting the government's hands. The government of India did not want to give the 50 crores which was promised to Pakistan during the partition, because at that time you had the insurgents coming in the Kashmir, all the tribals who were coming in and creating that discomfort there. So the Nehru's government thought the best way to arm twist Pakistan was to stop this 50 crores, which would go to arm them against us. So till that time, let's not give it and make it a condition. Now Gandhi says, no, it's a gentleman's promise, so we have to give it and all of this. And I go on a fast unto death. And it is at that moment that these people think that he is such a big threat to the country. And so let's murder him. So between 12th and 30th, in a span of 18 days, is how this whole conspiracy is created. Again, one Alfred Hitchcock kind of script there. There's a lot of, it's tragic comedy actually, where they'll get a gun from somewhere, they don't even know how to shoot it. And they're doing practice. They're doing gun shooting practice even on the morning of the murder. So, till the afternoon, they're trying to practice how to take, focus on a target. And on 20th of January, 10 days before, there is a botched up attempt to kill Gandhi at the Birla House. And so people knew in the government that his life is in danger. 10 days was a large enough time to, provide security to him. One of the fellows who put the bomb on Gandhi there in the Birla House, called Madan Lal Pava, he was also captured. And so he had told everything. Nathuram is involved in this, that the whole script was there with Nagarwala, who was the police commissioner who was looking at this. But the government of the time just chose to not take much action against this. And finally, on 30th January 1948, Gandhi is assassinated. And since Nathuram Godse, who was earlier a secretary of Savarkar, they somehow try to draw the line there and say this entire thing was orchestrated by Savarkar. There's one person who turns approver in the case called Digambar Badge. And this guy says, we all went to Savarkar's house and Savarkar gave this gun and told us that in Marathi, Yashasvi houn ya, that is, be victorious and come back. So it was all hearsay. He told, she told, there was nothing clearly, listed anywhere. And that's how he gets implicated. He's in arrest for about 1 year. The Red Fort trials happen in Delhi. And in the interim, just after Gandhi's murder, a less known fact is that just as what happened in 1984, when Indira Gandhi was killed and you had the Sikhs, Sikh riots. Similarly, after Gandhi's murder, you had the anti-Maharashtrian Brahmin riots in all parts of Maharashtra, where both Chitpavans and Deshasthas, they were murdered, their properties confiscated. A lot of...
By who?
By rioters, largely from the Congress, which is, again, a unknown, part of our history. There was a Justice Koyaji Commission which was set up by the Kolhapur Raja to investigate this, which brought out the fact that several congressmen were involved in this. And what an irony that to commemorate the death of the apostle of non-violence, you actually become violent, conduct riots, kill people, and nobody gets, they all go scot-free. In fact, there's a raid on Savarkar's house too, and Savarkar's younger brother, there's a huge stone or something thrown at him, and a couple of months later, he dies of a brain hemorrhage. So there's so much churn that's happening, and this man is in arrest in the prison in Delhi. 1 year the proceedings go, and the trial actually exonerates him that there was no direct, linkage, and so he's in the lack of evidence. He's actually let out from the court. Godse and Apte are, of course, executed.
And after he is exonerated in this trial, around the time I think Hindu Mahasabha winds down, but I think this is where the seeds of Jansangh
Yes.
came, right, which eventually becomes
Shama
SparX,
Prasad Mukherjee.
right, and Jansangh eventually morphs into BJP, right?
Yeah.
So at his last 10-15 years, Savarkar, so what was he up to? Was quiet life?
Yeah, I think by then he was so disillusioned, especially after the Gandhi murder trial, because at that age in your life, you're already some 70 or so, to be in jail and to face all the ignominy, and that the stain of the murder, I think, remained. Even if the courts, exonerated him, people kept bringing that up. He kept writing a lot in newspapers. He writes an entire book called 6 Epochs of Indian History around that time. Then he wrote on national issue policy matters, warning the Nehru government not trusting China too much. They say, in the Chinese, bhai bhai and all that. So and nobody listened anyway. And the Northeast, how the demographic change there could lead to insurgency. We have several articles that he wrote like that, but nothing really of consequence. And towards the end of his life, 1966, 26th of February is when he dies. And that's not a natural death. He stops taking food and water and medicine. Like the Jains, do that whole process of giving up your life yourself. So that's what he does, and that's how he...
So, if we zoom out and look at, his influence, through all these, we can almost say a century now.
Yeah.
He developed these ideas mostly, I guess, while he was at Paani, and then through maybe 20s and 30s.
Yeah.
His idea of, Hindutva, and he, as you earlier said, he has this poetic flourish and way of expressing things. He's able to put these ideas into writing, which slowly gained ground over a period of time. It was not like a bestseller and people were, lining up to, for...
Correct.
And he was, in some ways, was a controversial and marginalized figure. His wings clipped many different ways, before, earlier by the British and later also Indian government because of, this whole, at least, alleged involvement. How and when these ideas started gaining prominence? Because maybe I'll ask you differently. What about these ideas? What are some of the ideas which are kind of broke through and now part of, maybe larger consciousness for Savarkar to be quite a central figure, in how Hindutva is perceived now?
I don't think, Mukesh, even now he's the central figure, because as I said, the RSS idea of Hindutva and Savarkarite version of Hindutva were very different. Some elements of it coming in here. To my mind, the main difference between these two organizations was this Savarkar faction, always their entire idea revolved around one person. You have a hero, and this could be from Bhagwan Ram and Krishna and all that to maybe Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj and later Tilak and Savarkar. So around one hero you rally around. And as the hero rises or falls, this movement also rises and falls. So when he goes out of favor, the movement also fails. But the RSS did not believe in hero worship of one individual. So who is the Sarsang Chalak did not matter. Nobody, how many of us know beyond Hedgewar and Golwalkar who all came in? But the movement was more important. The ideology for them was important. And that is what kept the RSS alive, despite all the bans, all the attempts to muzzle it. After even Gandhi's murder, though the RSS was not even involved in it, as even the courts, adjudicated, still, in their thousands, even women and children of the RSS were holed up and put in jail for no fault for months by the first, independent government of India, just because you are guilty by association. But the thing about this organization was, since the idea mattered more than the individual, I think this continued to rally around. And history is witness to the fact that that has lived on a lot more than the Savarkarite faction. But some elements of this, like, national security, a strong military need to defend yourself. So peace comes at a cost, of arming yourself, rapid urbanization, a capitalistic kind of society. Several of these ideas which Savarkar propounded, somehow, without even acknowledging, him to that, these are being drawn into. So, including abrogation of Article 370. So that was a pet theme of all of them, whether it was Jansangh. Shama Prasad Mukherjee lost his life for that in Nazarbandi in Kashmir, where ek Sangh, ek Panth, ek Pradhan, ek Nishan, one flag, one prime minister, no two constitutions and all of that. So many of these elements which we see today are drawn from there without directly, being able to draw a line back to them.
Yeah, my main takeaway from this conversation, Vikram, is that history is very complex. People are very complex.
Indeed.
And as you know, we have a hindsight gives some clarity, but hindsight also a lot of details and nuances also tends to get lost.
The devil is in the details.
Devil is in the details, and your book is full of details. I think we touched upon just on a few key themes from that, but I think Savarkar, his life, he did give his life for what he believed in, and he suffered a lot in the process, and inspired some ideas which continues to be relevant, and because those ideas were relevant, I think it's again people are interested in understanding where are we, what's going on, and how things how different choices were made in those formative years, and it's worth a serious read. And
that's true, Mukesh. The sad part is, what I'm happy now is, at least now, after my two books came in 2019 and 2021, there've been a plethora of books. Even this year, a couple of months back, there's a new book that's come on Savarkar, which is not very complimentary to him, which is fine. You at least have, in a democracy, if an intellectually vibrant society needs to debate, have differences of opinion and argue and dissent with each other. But almost all the decades after freedom, Savarkar had become a persona non grata. To even talk about him, forget talking about him, there was someone of the eminence of Pandit Hridaynath Mangeshkar, right, the famous music composer, the brother of Lata Mangeshkar. So he had taken some of Savarkar's poems in Marathi, Ne Majasi Ne Parat Matru Bhumila, Sagara Pran Tad Madala. So that, and Jayostute, and all these poems that he had written, tuned them, and Lata ji, Asha ji, and all of these sisters, they sang it. And at that time, Hridaynath ji was in the All India Radio. So for the crime that he committed of taking Savarkar's poems, he was given a show cause notice, saying, why did you choose this? And Hridaynath ji writes back saying, good poem, great poet, reason enough to tune it. And for that crime, he actually lost his job from the All India Radio. He's on record talking about this. So we are talking of intolerance and, as if, it was a garden of heaven and honey and everything before. What is it now? At least now we are having people talk about these things. You're not cancelled. You don't lose your livelihood, your reputation if you talk about him. So protagonist, antagonist, make him what you may. I always say you can love someone, you can hate someone, but let your love or hatred be informed, not on rhetoric, not on assumptions, not by your stereotypes of what that person is.
Yeah, and for the cause of staying informed, I think, detailed books are a lot better than slogans, which are very convenient and, Twitter friendly. But I think we need people like you. And it's great, there is a different, history should have different versions. Indeed. And, things like freedom and freedom of speech, they're all work in progress. And as long as we are going from one station to a better station, it's going to keep evolving. And I think history also, one gets many short. People can look back on his life after 50 or 100 years also.
Correct.
And then just from that lens, we are Tipu Sultan we talked about, 250 years ago.
Correct.
So I think this is a never-ending process. But I learned so much from this conversation, Vikram. I think your work is really of topmost quality. I think you going through 11,000 pages of just one trial, and God knows what else you've gone through to be able to put this together. It's a fascinating story, and I really enjoyed both from reading the book and from the conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mukesh. Thank you so much.
At SparX, we aim to bring to you stories of exponential impact. We share in-depth analysis of what goes behind success stories. If you find our conversations interesting, you can join us by subscribing to our YouTube channel. You can also listen to SparX on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or any other audio platform of your choice. If you have any suggestions on who we should invite or what topics we need to cover, just let us know in the comments. We are always listening, looking for ways to improve, and keep getting better as we go along.